Hello everyone, Marcustal here, and today we're going to be discussing two videos created by the PBS Game-Show channel by the creator Jamin. The videos were discussing both the subject of virtual reality, although in different ways. The first one directly related to Sword Art Online and asked the question, would you want to live inside of Sword Art Online? The second one was essentially covering over the new Crescent Bay announcement, although in reality I don't really think they went over Crescent Bay itself all that much. But hey, to each his own, and the reality is they still provided a very great subject for discussion, so I'm going to jump up on it. Well then everyone, by the way, I'm going to leave the links to both of those videos down below in the description, and have the annotations right here, so if you want to watch them before watching me talk, go ahead. I'll give you a moment. Okay, we good? Alrighty then. So, as an answer to the question of the first video, would I want to live in Sword Art Online? My answer is no. No, 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 no. No. I mean, this is probably a little surprising to you guys, but the reality of the situation is, guys, I consider Sword Art Online to be kind of low in versatility. I mean, I'm a person that likes to be able to do a lot of things, and the idea of just being strapped down to a single set of rules for my entire life is already the reason why I want to stop being in this reality and invent virtual reality to begin with. So why go from being trapped in one reality to trapping myself in another reality? It doesn't really seem all that effective. Now, living inside of virtual reality, that is another whole topic. In that case, I might be able to consider it. But the idea of being trapped in a single individual title isn't all that appealing to me. So, yeah. Even if it wasn't Sword Art Online, if it was some other software, yeah, I don't really see myself choosing to be inside of it for my entire life. Although at the same time, if you do choose to, well, to each his own. But remember this, guys, I'm a person of very large scale and a lot of versatility, so unless the title has more or less the amount of versatility I was looking for in my initial title, which, for those of you wondering, I was looking into making a video game with roughly 12 million square miles worth of land to traverse, as well as constantly changing laws of physics, a large dynamic ecosystem, and a variety of different items and natures that all tailor to every individual user's specific tastes, and a procedural system designed to essentially create the seamless, perfect experience for every individual player simultaneously. You can probably already imagine just how insane that is. But, yeah. So, if I wouldn't even be satisfied living inside of something like that, you guys can probably imagine that Sword Art Online wouldn't match it either. Well, moving on. In the video here, for those of you wondering why I'm not playing it, aside from the fact that I don't want to really hit on copyright issues, and the fact that watching a YouTube video inside of a YouTube video feels kind of weird, but, yeah. So that's why I'm not playing it, but continuing onwards, in the video, we can see that there's present Jamin and future Jamin, and the thing is, future Jamin comes in order to start discussing certain things with present Jamin, and explain to him that he has been trapped inside of Sword Art Online. His reasoning is apparently due to the fact of cost, and that they are terrible at the game in certain areas. Hence the look, although we all should know the fourth wall reason why, but continuing onwards, effectively, that's actually a very interesting topic in my belief. Because here's the thing, guys. Living inside of virtual reality is going to be a tricky thing, because directly conscious uploading onto a computer, I don't see that happening unless we hit the Singularity. And after the Singularity, guys, it's effectively a take all hands down, anything goes region. At that point, godhood, time travel, reality warping, meeting aliens, machine gods, and stuff like that are all on the plate, so I don't really like to speculate on the Singularity, since it roughly equates to whose imagined ego is bigger than the other's imagined ego. So I'm not going to go into that, but yeah. Effectively, with the with taking care of somebody's body while they're experiencing VR, that doesn't really seem like too much of an alien concept. I mean, that's effectively what we saw happening in Sword Art Online. They were inside of VR, and they were playing the game and trying to get out. Meanwhile, people were taking care of their bodies IRL on the other side, making sure that they didn't die. as we improve our methods of doing this, it wouldn't be too surprising if people just selectively opted, I'm just want to live the rest of my life in VR, take care of my vessel while I'm out, and peace. So it wouldn't be too surprising for me to see that kind of stuff once VR hits its peak. I mean, right now, guys, my Oculus Rift is great and all that, but yeah, I don't want to spend every waking hour of my life wearing this, even if I do kind of want to try sleeping in it so I can see, well, mainly because I want to see Hatsune Miku's glorious face before me as I go to bed every single night for the rest of my life. I would definitely want that. Yep. Yeah, so there's that, but aside from that, actually living in VR is kind of impractical at this moment due to one, the lack of software, two, the technology just not being there yet, three, we don't have inputs, which correlates to the former one. Inputs just aren't there yet. And, yeah, that more or less explains it on a broader level. And four, due to the fact that, guys, VR is probably not the healthiest thing for your body in terms of your psychological state or its physiological level. I mean, one of the ideas I actually had involved trying to simulate the sensation of 0G constantly in VR to combat the problems of having a lack of vestibular inputs currently. And I can only imagine that if you were to spend all your time inside of 0G, or just spend all your time in VR in general, you would suffer from some severe muscular atrophy similar to Kirito. Actually, it would probably be worse than Kirito, since in Kirito's case, I'm amazed that he managed to walk at all, let alone move, when he woke up from Sword Art Online, which was surprising. Also kind of surprised that there were just tons and tons of doctors running around everywhere saying, hey, people are coming out of VR. Although I suppose it had been a little while after the game had been beaten, so I suppose that accounts. But anyhow, yeah, effectively, it wouldn't be too surprising to see people just choosing to have frugal lives in order to enjoy virtual reality, because, quite simply, guys, VR is a lot more cost-effective than real life. In real life, a big house could cost me upwards of $1 million. In virtual reality, all it costs me is a few gigs of memory and the patience to build the house. Maybe I want to build it myself, Minecraft style, or maybe I just buy a pre-built thing, or maybe there's a system that does it automatically, or like The Sims or something like that. So yeah, having a virtual life is technically more cost-effective than having a real one, because in real life, a good meal that's very tasty and well cooked could cost me upwards of $20, even $100, depending on which restaurant you go to. Whereas in virtual reality, a good meal could only cost me, well, nothing. Or whatever the software is, or if I really wanted a custom-tailored meal developed by a person, well, we don't really know the pricing for that now, don't we? Yep, everyone remember that whole problem in Log Horizon where no one knew how to charge things? Well, we're going to be seeing that in virtual reality too, most likely. So it's going to be very interesting to see how costing structures go in real life, although I can almost guarantee you that everything in VR will most likely be significantly cheaper than its IRL counterpart, unless the person is being unreasonable. Well, now, continuing onwards, on another note, in terms of actually living in VR, it can be kind of correlated a little bit to what you saw in The Matrix, whereby if you guys haven't seen The Matrix, what are you doing on this channel? Or how young are you? Oh my gosh, I forgot. Some of you might be really young. Wow. But, wow, I feel old. Anyhow, in The Matrix, spoiler warning, at one point one of the bad guys, or a double agent inside of the group, is eating a steak with the enemy, which is Agent Smith, I believe. And effectively, he eats a steak and says, yep, delicious. And he's comparing it to some kind of slop, corn pops looking thing that you see in them eating on the spaceship in real life. And he basically says, why would I want that over this, even though this is supposedly artificial? Because reality is, it's completely the same, so there's no effective reason why they would want something like something poor in quality IRL when they can have something superior in virtual reality. So it's definitely something to consider, although at the same time, I do think that there's a lot more to having a constant experience in virtual reality and enjoying it than just simply being in VR, because as I said, guys, VR is a two-part system. It is one, simulating every sense, but two, making the simulation that you experience worth having. And that second bit, making it worth having, is not an easy task. Because tell me, guys, name a single game that, without changing, you believe you can play every single day for the rest of your life, constantly, 24/7, non-stop. If you can find that game, please tell me, because I need to play it now. So, yeah, there's that. Continuing onwards, by the way, guys, I should have noted this earlier, but I do have some notes here since there's quite a lot to talk about. So, moving forward. Yeah, guys, in the movie The Matrix, there was another little thing that they did, whereby they uploaded martial arts into the main character Neo's mind, so they were already instantly good at Kung Fu and a bunch of other fighting styles. Yeah, we won't have that early on in virtual reality. So for all of you wondering, the moment that you go into VR, I'm going to go kill stuff and be awesome like Kirito, that's probably not going to be how it's going to be. It's most likely going to be more like Klein, whereby you get knocked flat on your ass by a boar, which is the rough equivalent of a slime. And for those of you that haven't tried virtual reality in its current iteration, you probably don't know that things can be scary in virtual reality. The act of seeing anything move around and approach you very quickly or that looks scary will be just as scary as it would be in real life. So if you personally do not feel as though you can wrestle with a boar in real life, you're probably not going to be able to deal with it very well inside of virtual reality either. I'm actually kind of curious as to how Shino managed to bear with that idea inside of Sword Art Online 2, since, quite frankly, that gun should have looked just as scary to her in VR as it is in real life. I'm not sure why it didn't, but hey, plot reasons. So, yeah, essentially, for those of you that are expecting to be awesome in VR immediately, it's probably not going to happen. I'm going to discuss this a bit more at length in the future video. It's going to be discussing the Sword Art as a concept itself, like the actual sword arts of Sword Art Online, because I actually think they're an ingenious strategy, and I'm looking into it from a game design perspective and going to be discussing it pretty soon in that respect. Moving forward, Future Damon at one point notes that you can basically have effectively any look that you want, and that the reason he looks like this is because of, well, being in Sword Art Online, trapped, and a bunch of other reasons. But on another note, effectively, with Sword Art Online, with appearances in VR, yeah, that's just as it is right now. You can have any kind of character model you want. You can be a girl or a girl. I mean, guy IRL, girl IRL. You know what I mean. Effectively, you can switch genders, be an alien, be a monster, be a machine. You can be anything in VR. It doesn't really matter. So effectively, the idea of your particular vessel or appearance being associated with you is going to be very bizarre, I believe, in VR. It's kind of like when you're friends with somebody right now, and you only on the internet, you only know them via the internet. The only appearance you have to associate them with is their avatar. So if they change their avatar, it's going to be kind of like changing a significant part of their identity. So I'm curious as to how this is going to really be impacted in VR, in an environment whereby effectively there's so much information that you can get that switching it all of a sudden will be very jarring for people. So yeah, guys, when you start creating your VR models right now, think about it. You might be saddled with that image for a long time going forward, unless you decide to switch profiles. But hey, your friends can't really follow you all that well, and that doesn't change the fact that you had that first character model. So think twice before you decide to use a provocative or bizarre image on VR as your image. Alright, moving forward, they also mentioned that some people managed to have some form of afterlife in VR using bots. Yeah, I'm not too sure what to think of this. I mean, the idea of having AI in virtual reality is far from anything all that controversial. The thing that really surprises me in terms of thoughts is the idea of a specific person having an afterlife in some respects due to that. I mean, the idea of copying people's minds or consciousnesses and uploading them to computers has been around for a while now. And quite frankly, I'm not too sure about doing those kind of things. I'm kind of leaning against those kind of ideas. I mean, we don't know enough about the components of our sentience, and it really goes into philosophy on whether or not you're dualistic, the ideas of the soul, whether or not you believe in the soul to begin with, whether or not you're materialistic, and a bunch of other things. So it's a very complex matter, so I'm not too sure about those details. But the idea of AI doing it in some respects isn't too weird, and the effective idea of keeping someone alive after they die, that I can completely see. Because let me give you an example, guys. Right now, a lot of AI researchers have been moving on to looking into more creating AI that can learn rather than AI that just directly knows things. So effectively, it would be more like a child. You first start out with a basic AI, you place it in an environment where it learns, and then it steadily becomes, well, more like a person. I mean, can you really say that you're equally the same as you were 10, 20 years ago in terms of intellect? Or well, depends on how old you are. You might not even be 10, depending on whether or not you're on your age. But anyhow, pardon this old man's ideas, but effectively, with stuff like that in VR, it's going to be a very interesting thought because you can have an AI, raise it in VR, and that's actually one of the reasons that AI researchers are probably going to have a good look at VR, because there's already been discussions of using things like MMOs to help train AIs, which quite frankly terrifies me because they would have to deal with all the trolls and the gold farmers inside of virtual reality. So I can only imagine approaching an AI in VR and having it respond to me by saying, would you like to buy some gold? At which point I'd be like, what? Yeah, but effectively, the idea of using VR to train AI is not too surprising, since with VR, social interactions are still a yet-to-be-seen topic, since we're not really too sure whether or not the current modern internet's standards will translate into VR, or whether or not IRL standards will translate into VR, whether or not it's going to be a weird amalgamation of both, what it's going to be like. So it's just going to be interesting to see that, but let's say I have an AI that is based on you. And don't doubt that, guys. I'm going to be upfront with you guys right here and say it, but my Sanctuary Hub, all my software, Ethereal Link, and everything that I develop is going to be tracking a lot of your data in VR. So it's going to be using it mainly for calibration purposes. That's what I mainly want it for, and for some procedural generation on the software end. But outside of that, it wouldn't be too surprising for somebody on the software end on non-systems like mine to take your data and create an AI clone of you, like Drivatars. So all of a sudden, that Drivatar will continue on for years and years and years. I actually remember reading an article, I think on Kotaku, where a player said that they played with their dad, even though their dad had died for a while now, because they found the ghost, or the trial ghost, that they had in the game inside of Xbox. And it was a kind of charming story. Effectively, they kept playing until they could try to beat it, and when they were about to beat it, they stopped before the finish line so the ghost could pass them, I think. It's very touching. I'm already getting the feels already. But, yeah, stuff like that in VR might not be too surprising, since, effectively, with the amount of data we're getting on you, creating a complete and utter copy of you after you're dead wouldn't be too weird. But I'm not sure how that would be taken culturally, since even though they are a copy of you, are they actually you? Is this more along the lines of actually cloning you, rather than necessarily taking you on and making you live on afterwards? It's a very interesting thought, so just something to think about. I really hadn't thought about it before until this video, so yeah, kind of curious on that. Alright then, moving on, there's also the topic of, let's see, oh yeah, the fact that VR is something that's going to affect the entirety of the social strata. Guys, I did mention that we're not too sure how VR, whether or not it'll translate real life social or internet social, but the fact of the matter is it's going to be a huge social phenomenon. Why do you think Facebook spent $2 billion on Oculus? They can already see the potential, because quite frankly, guys, I'm a lot more interested in interacting with family and other individuals via VR than I am via a regular chat room. Because in those cases, you just get a much bigger experience. Let's say I'm in Japan and I have a daughter here in the US or something, and I want to give them a hug or something. Right now, I have no means to do that. But in virtual reality, I can give them anything. I can cook them a meal, I can give them a hug, I can do absolutely anything effectively that I would be able to do IRL, if not more. So at that point, the distances between people are effectively being shrunk insignificantly. At that point, there's basically no distance at all. I mean, the idea of long-distance relationships is going to be a very interesting thing in VR, because all of a sudden, the amount of things that you can't do with the person are significantly reduced. And the only time that you can't spend with them is the only time that you are away from your device. So at that point, maybe the idea of long-distance relationships themselves are going to end. Since now, all of a sudden, instead of where originally we had nothing, and then we had letters, and now we had phones, and then texts, well, telegrams before phones, texts, we're back to, I think now FaceTime is the most advanced stuff, and pretty soon, now we're going to have VR, and with VR, it's going to be essentially the peak, so it's going to be a very interesting social dynamic, and I'm really particularly curious as to whether or not people, as I said, the troll culture and the internet culture will migrate into VR, because I'm kind of curious whether or not the increased amount of information will intimidate people on some degrees, since you're going to be a little bit more nervous about doing certain actions when all of a sudden somebody can and just jump up
as
into your
compared
face
to
and
a
scare
monitor
you.
whereby there's a small disconnect between you and the screen. It's meant to be seen, but outside of the social strata, there's a lot of other things VR could be used for. Education, for example. I have a feeling that if I ever do get around to getting kids, I will probably educate them inside of virtual reality classrooms, because they can just get a much better experience, guys. I mean, compare it to this way. Think of it this way. When you have to dissect a frog or read about volcanoes and other scientific concepts or history right now in books, it's kind of lame. But in VR, you can directly observe those acts in a very visually interesting method. So all of a sudden, those lame-o documentary videos that some people don't like watching, quite personally, I love watching documentaries. They're just a ton of fun because of all the information that you get, but not everyone's a huge nerd like me. But effectively, a lot of the documentary videos that put people to sleep now in classes could be replaced with documentary areas in VR, and all of a sudden it'll be a lot more interesting. So you can see an actual volcano, you can see George Washington going up and shooting enemies or directing his armies. It's going to be a lot more interesting, and I think that's going to improve the quality of education even further. So don't doubt VR being used for things like education. Business uses without a doubt, because all of a sudden you don't need to fly out to some place to have a very good and proper conversation with somebody, and you won't even need to 3D print things, since all of a sudden you can directly feel and observe what the model is going to be like IRL inside of virtual reality. So it can improve a lot of different mediums, and the biggest one I thought of was the process of creating stuff itself in virtual reality. So in other words, virtual reality helps create more things in virtual reality. The entire creative process itself in VR can be done inside of virtual reality. So, you know what, guys? Let me provide you a good link here to another video. It's called World Builder, right here by Branit FX. Yes, let the ad play out a little bit, but I'm not going to play this video out since, just go watch it on YouTube. I'll provide the link in a bit, right up here. But, yeah, guys, essentially, the video is interesting because it shows somebody creating something or an environment for a specific purpose in virtual reality. I'm not going to spoil what it actually means or what he's actually doing, but effectively, he's showing the way that a VR UI can augment the creative process. So, you know what, let me skip ahead a bit. Here he's creating a cube. See, generation of large objects, small objects, and different other things. So just having that amount of versatility in virtual reality, that's actually one of the reasons why I myself was looking into virtual reality, because if it hadn't been for VR, guys, I'd actually be going to college right now in the Savannah College of Art and Design for animation. So, yeah, you can probably imagine that the benefits that VR could provide to the creative process are definitely something that I was considering. So, yeah, just consider that. VR will probably accelerate the process of creating VR content in the future. So, animation for movies and all sorts of other experiences are going to be much easier and going to produce higher quality content at less of a cost as compared to as it is right now, where you require a lot of training in regular software. Well, you're going to need some training in VR. It's going to be considerably more intuitive. I'll get to the note on that intuitiveness in a bit, but yeah, moving forward to the next topic. Pause this video now since I don't want to show any more. Yeah, with the last two little bits here, after discussing the whole bots and that there's also the matter of virtual currency. Quite frankly, I'm not too sure how to handle this one, in all honesty. I'm not much of a business guy, and quite frankly, I'm probably a pretty poor person when it comes to dealing with money and stuff like that. But at the same time, virtual currency is going to be an issue because of the fact that we really won't know how to quantify things, since, as I said, guys, everything is infinite on a computer, so how do you judge the value of an MP3 and other such things like that when they can be generated infinitely and exchanged infinitely? I mean, we already have enough issues with piracy as it is, and I suppose we do have some slight basis for things right now due to the fact that we have things like, as I said, methods to buy MP3s and stuff like that, since we do have a value for MP3s. It's like 99 cents on the iTunes store, or an album for like 11 bucks. So we have some kind of a frame of reference, but at the same time, a lot of other things that we don't have like quantitative values for are going to be tricky. So how do I decide the value of a pre-scripted, pre-designed massage? How about a procedural one? How much is the value of a house or food in VR? There's really no way to quantify it properly, and if I do buy it, effectively that MP3, as I mentioned, is mine. So does the fact I bought a restaurant's food once mean that I own that sandwich now for the rest of my life and I can keep eating it and eating it over and over? What about things like drugs? If I invent a VR drug and I decide to take it constantly, there's nothing to stop me from having an infinite quantity of it and never wanting to buy things again. It's a very complex matter, and it relates back to the question of quality of things in VR. Since I think I might have mentioned it earlier, but effectively, within VR, there are two bits that you have to consider. The reality aspect, the aspect that makes it a simulation that feels real. You also have to consider the virtual aspect, the reason you want to be there, the motivations, the engagement. And that engagement one's going to be tricky, since if you keep something constantly going on and on and on, you're going to need more and more potent effects before things in order to have a good experience. So as I said, once you start taking things like, let's say I eat sugary meals all the time, I'm going to need a much more potent dosage of sugar in order to enjoy a similar experience again. So just a thought there for you guys, but definitely something to consider. For the actual money aspect, as I said, I'm not too versed or qualified to really discuss that topic all that much, but it is definitely something to consider. And virtual currencies, as I said, I don't know much about this stuff. So moving on to the negative bits, since they do cover some of the bad parts of VR. They basically say that the developers have an incredible amount of power over you. As we all know, due to the fact that we have watched Sword Art Online, or if you haven't watched it, cool on you by following this channel without actually knowing on Sword Art Online. Keep on giving it a try to see how long it goes. Maybe you're gonna skip this video because I mentioned Sword Art Online, but anyhow, with Sword Art Online, effectively, the premise involved 10,000 players being trapped inside of virtual reality by Kayaba Akihiko, a developer gone rogue who decided to trap all of his players for what is effectively an unexplained reason, aside from apparently saying something along the lines of, I wanted to have a world and rule over it. I have done so, and thus I am satisfied, or something like that. Meh. So effectively, there's no really... While that may sound like a fictional example, at the same time, things like that will happen IRL with certain other issues. So if I have a cause and I really want people to know about it, I could create a virus and forcefully make people learn about my topic using propaganda or possibly negative experiences. Or if I want people to feel my pain, I could make them go through a traumatic VR experience like war. I mean, guys, you might not remember it, but technically in the Fairies Dance arc, towards the end, we did see the pain slider turn that all the way to 0. There is no pain absorption, and you will feel all the pain. So if I blow your brains off, you're going to feel that, and I can repeatedly do so over and over and over and over and over again. That's a very big question on how we're going to react, and whether or not our bodies themselves are designed for that kind of pleasure. I mean, there have been some studies that stated something along the lines of people who take particular types of drugs early on in life are a lot less happy and it's more likely to suffer from depression later in life because effectively their brains literally couldn't handle the excessive amounts of happiness they were having. So definitely something to think about. We never know. I mean, while we like to think that our virtual experiences are going to be completely detached from IRL, until we can find a way to completely and utterly transfer our consciousnesses inside of computers, and I've already doubted this is going to happen unless we hit the Singularity, we are still going to have to consider the biological implications of our pleasures and thoughts inside of virtual reality. Alrighty then, moving forward a little bit more, they mentioned something about VR ads and stuff like that, so yeah, that's something you're going to have to consider since every object in virtual reality can be provided an ad. My hat can have an ad for it, my eyes can have an ad for it, there can be an ad plastered on my forehead, there can be an ad showing up just because you looked in a certain direction. Ads can be placed literally everywhere in virtual reality, and while you should be able to avoid it so long as you don't go online, at the same time it's something to consider, and it's definitely it definitely shows the way that certain internet features of now can translate into VR, although I personally am not too sure how troll culture and things like that will transfer into VR, due to the fact that trolls generally get away with the fact, or exist as a significant issue, due to the fact that there's a huge divorce between the you online and the you IRL, due to the distance that the monitor creates. But with VR, effectively every statement and everything you do is directly and much more viscerally something that can be seen from you. And quite frankly, things like comment section and stuff like that aren't as common IRL, so it's going to be interesting to see whether or not there's even a commenting culture in VR. So unless you're willing to go up to someone and straight up and say you are a You see, guys, I can't actually do all that much swearing and other stuff like that, or memesness. I'm not really that kind of a guy. But, yeah, effectively, if you're going to spout verbal abuse at somebody, you're going to have to be doing it from your eyes and your perspective. And I'm kind of hoping that perhaps a little bit of the human instinct to not do those kind of things to people in public might stem a little bit into VR, due to the fact that that person can technically punch you. So, yeah, whenever I do this to the camera and I try to punch it, you're going to notice some of those effects. And in VR, those effects are going to be doubled down. I'm actually kind of thinking it would be kind of cool if you can have an automatic anti-troll feature whereby if you troll, you automatically lose system protection. So it's a huge balancing act, and we're going to have to see how that progresses. Although at the same time, if we don't have punishment, equally bad things can happen. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit in Log Horizon, and I don't want to spoil it, but some very bad things can happen in there, and they kind of cover it. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, guys, but there are some things in the Sword Art Online's ethic code idea that can be equally as terrifying as the idea of certain things. In case I haven't talked about it, I'm just going to give you a quick hint on it. Sleep, PK, and ethics code. Think about that for a bit. Alrighty then. On the final little bit, effectively, I just want to basically note, with VR, guys, VR is an entirely new medium. It will deliver and it will do things based on what we choose to do with it. If we choose to be jerks and idiots and mean and all sorts of other things in VR and cause horrible experiences, all we're going to get is a heavily regulated medium that might not even be publicly available or could be banned by the FCC, at which point only those who can develop the technology or get it on the black market will be able to obtain it. So that would be the worst case scenario. Potentially we could have other issues with a bunch of censorship, something I really want to avoid because I really do believe the vast potential of VR should be explored with creative freedom and First Amendment rights. And lastly, there's also the fact that if we do take VR to the next level and properly take advantage of it, it could potentially provide us with the kind of boon society needs right now. It can improve education, thus accelerating the path of technological advancement so we can tackle some of the difficulties that we're dealing with right now. It can help improve human empathy by allowing different groups to experience what it feels like to be from other perspectives. So maybe we can bridge some of the disparity between genders in certain respects, or different cultures and races and things like that in virtual reality due to the increased empathy factor of VR. There's a lot of potential, and I really do hope that we can take advantage of it. I'm going to go into that a little bit more in this once I start talking about the second video, which will basically be right now, but a little later in that. With the second video, Jamin here was trying to talk about his thoughts on Crescent Bay. I don't think he really covered Crescent Bay all that much. He mainly kind of started off on it, but then just kind of went on talking about VR in general, which VR in general is still a great topic, so I'm just going to respond more or less to some of the things he discussed. First of all, there was presence. Guys, with presence right now in VR, it is something that you can experience even on a DK2, but the problem is, even with a DK2, the effect of virtual reality can easily be broken depending on the quality of the virtual aspect that I mentioned. Pardon, some slight hiccupy thing going on. Effectively, with virtual reality right now, you need to make sure that the simulation is extremely good in order to make sure that the sense of presence stays. But apparently with the more recent Crescent Bay units, it's a lot easier and it tends to stay almost automatically, so I suppose it's just a good sign to show that Oculus is still making some incredible progress, and I'm quite frankly very excited to see where their next dev kit or prototype is going to hit up, and how amazing the consumer version is going to end up being in the end. Quite frankly, I'm mainly pining for an increase in field of view in the final units, and possibly a slight increase in resolution. I'd be satisfied with maybe 106, with maybe a 140 degree, or God, by all Sanctuary, if they manage to pull off maybe 160 degree field of view with an 1800 by 3200 display, that would probably be more than enough, or maybe not 3200, 21 by 9 maybe on a curved glass display at 4200 pixels. Yeah, that's sounding pretty nice. Anyhow, moving forward, aside from presence, they also went to escapism. That's a little weird to discuss in some respects, because every medium in some respect is escapist, and it's essentially decided whether or not something is escapist based on how you use it. I mean, he himself describes whether or not something is escapist if you're using it to avoid your current reality, or if you are using it in order to improve your current reality, that's heavily context-based, and I think VR is too versatile to really say it's going to do one thing or the other. It really depends on how we use it. Alrighty then, moving forward a bit more. In terms of curation for VR, for those of you wondering what curation is, it's essentially when you cherry pick and decide which features in VR or other mediums you decide to use. So for example, if I have a gallery, the images I choose to put up on that gallery is me curating it. So there's that. But effectively, curation in VR is a very hard thing to do. And it's a very important thing to pull off because of the fact that VR is so much more potent than other mediums. Where right now, if I download a bad app on the App Store, all I need to worry about is the wasted time, potentially wasted money, and a potential virus. In VR, I have to potentially also worry about mental trauma, physical how should I put it, physical side effects due to the results of excess VR usage in poor contexts, and or potentially even more traumatic, having my own time and efforts or psychology influenced depending on the technology being used. So the idea of VR being used negatively is something that we have to consider, and curation is going to be very important in that respect. That's one of the areas where VR will potentially suffer from more regulation than regular mediums. Because allow me to provide an example, guys. One of the biggest patrons of VR early on was the military. Because, why? They need a method to train their soldiers. And you guys have all heard on the news where people say, video games are making our kids violent. That hasn't been proved, of course, and there's actually more evidence to the contrary, and effectively it's been completely disproved. But with VR, there might actually be a point to it. I mean, even in SAO, they showed Kirito apparently saying, they actually cite that Kirito managed to fight off Sugo IRL because of the training he obtained used as a unarmed skill in Sword Art Online. So you can probably imagine that with mental training, somebody, if their body can keep up with it, would effectively receive a military grade or more advanced training inside of virtual reality, and the critics and decriers will have a point in that respect. How do you regulate that? When we have an entire generation of super soldiers walking around on the street, that's going to be a very big cultural impact. And similarly, how do you deal with experiences that you don't want children to experience or other people to experience? I mean, how would somebody as a father respond, or father or mother or something respond to having a child come before them and say, I was raped in VR? Depending on their technological savviness, if they themselves do not use virtual reality, that could be extremely weird because now they lack a frame of reference to understand what has happened. It's kind of like early on with the internet age, parents didn't understand or still continue to not understand what it means to be bullied on the internet and on social networks and don't comprehend the significance of those kind of actions. And we're going to potentially see even more severe cases in VR, and it's going to be tragic when we hear something along the lines of somebody being tortured, assaulted, or raped in VR and having no legal repercussions from which to do on the perpetrator because there's just no legislation in place, or they're just in an area whereby they're outside of the reach of the law. I mean, we have demonstrated with the internet that there is a lot of things on the internet you just can't take advantage of, and that you can't manipulate and can't regulate all that well. It's the reality of the situation, but we have to consider it. At which point I'm hoping that we can have an open VR environment, but in all likelihood it might end up being just as bigly policed as something like Chinese or Korean internets, whereby there's some information being completely and genuinely blocked from the public. But at the same time, there's no way to prevent people from making their own content, so hey, there's really no way to deal with this issue in some respects. So, yeah, that's just another thought right there. And lastly, there was the subject of gender equality. I think he might have been talking about this because it was mentioned during the Oculus panel. There was during the keynotes that I was talking about yesterday. I think I might have mentioned it at the end of yesterday's video. But effectively, one of the people that came up to ask questions mentioned whether or not virtual reality was going to end up like other technical industries where it's male-dominated in the industry. And these are my thoughts on it, guys. I don't really want to take a side on politics. In all honesty, if I did try to take a side on it, it would probably be ridiculous. I'd end up on the same level of Sora on No Game No Life, whereby cute makes right, or as long as it's beautiful, it is right, or something like that. It's completely ludicrous, and I know for a fact that my personal thoughts on that respect are definitely not worthy of having themselves be very properly voiced. or at the very least, I myself do not consider them worthy of listening to my own mouth utter them. So, effectively, I'm just going to say, in terms of the industry, guys, the gender disparity will be as big as it is probably in most other technical industries, just simply due to the way that culture tends to direct things. So generally, in that respect, I guess one could say, yeah, it's going to end up like other technical industries, but it kind of might also not, due to the fact that VR, in general, is going to cause a sea change in everything. And once we manage to get intuitive user designs, in other words, basically a control system for VR where it's manipulatable just as you would do your IRL body, and by extension, software that takes advantage of it, all of a sudden I can imagine VR suddenly being a much more open place for women and generally anybody, because of the fact of the matter is, at that stage in time, you aren't going to have to deal with things like having the idea of, because generally the idea is you don't want to have girls experience very overly complicated technical stuff, but phones are just as common between guys and girls. So you have to wonder, okay, so will VR end up on that side of the camp? And I think it might, because of the fact of the matter is, it's just so intuitive. It's as intuitive as it gets, actually. So effectively, it's going to be as permeated as I'd imagine phones are right now amongst people who have the devices. I mean, the only area where I think that VR might end up a little bit segmented is, as they mentioned, as Jamin himself mentioned, apparently there are certain biological features that need to be tailored a little bit more towards women or men due to the nature of our bodies. So I can kind of see stuff like that, but at the same time, and I can also see perhaps the general culture just deciding, oh, if VR is too expensive, oh, we don't want to buy something like that for a girl, it's too expensive. And quite frankly, I think ideas like that are very old-fashioned, and I don't like them. But hey, I'm just saying it how I kind of observe it. Remember, guys, the exception is not the rule. You have to consider the broader context. If there's a stereotype, it's unfortunately usually because there's a large amount of evidence towards it, even if it's outdated. If it's outdated, well, it's outdated, but I'm probably digging myself into a trench here. But quite frankly, just know, I personally kind of stand neutral on this. I am a cloud cuckoo lander on this respect. My opinion is probably not what should be followed or heard or really made relevant. You'd probably just be creeped out or just wonder what the nightmare's wrong with you. But yeah, that's effectively most of what I have to say on that respect. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I did kind of cover this topic now. So yeah. Oh, on one final note, perhaps that gender swapping that has been mentioned a few times now. Remember, guys, with VR, when you have a vessel, you tend to take on some of its traits in a mental sense. And I've already verified this for myself. When I looked down and I saw breasts, I was imagining that perhaps I was getting a sensation of almost being a woman. And I can only imagine how much more sophisticated it'll get once I can actually touch the pair of things, or other parts and everything else. I mean, you can feel as though you are what you see in VR, so it's going to be very interesting, to say the least, to see how culture reacts to such a thing. When girls being used as G.I.RL, guy in real life, girl in real life, when those kind of things all of a sudden have much greater significance. So this is going to be a very interesting thing to see. Well then, everyone, that more or less covers most of what I want to say in this video. Sorry that these past few videos have been so long. They're kind of unedited, well, very lowly edited, and just some light little touches here and there. I just mainly wanted to get them out really quickly and just see whether or not the format is anything that I like. And I guess you could also see I'm just playing around with Open Broadcaster, the tool I'm using to record right now. You can probably see the little tab right down there. Yep, there we have it. So, yeah. Thanks you very much for watching, guys. Remember to hit the like button down below if you liked the video. Hit the subscribe button if you want to hear more content on virtual reality like what you saw here. Although, hopefully a lot shorter and better edited. And, yeah. Help out the channel by hitting the like button and sharing your thoughts down below. Let's just have a good conversation, guys. That's most of the fun of this kind of videos. I get to see the kind of thoughts that you guys have. And, well, then, everyone, thank you very much for watching. This has been Marcus Stahl, logging out.